Today, we're diving into an epic story, a 2,000-year journey to figure out how a small, almost invisible movement in a forgotten corner of the Roman Empire grew into a global civilization and, well, the world's largest faith.
Just to give you a sense of scale, right now, there are about 2.4 billion Christians on Earth. That makes it, by a long shot, the biggest religion in the world. And its impact on art, on philosophy, on law, on just about everything in history is pretty much impossible to measure.
So that massive number brings up a huge question. How on earth did that happen? I mean, how did a tiny group of followers, whose leader was executed as a state criminal by the Roman Empire, not only survive, but eventually become the main religion inside that very same empire? It's a truly incredible story.
So, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we have to look at the man at the center of it all, the historical Jesus. Then, we'll see how a real movement was born from his followers. After that, the big one, the dramatic flip from a persecuted group to the official power in Rome. And finally, we'll dig into how the faith started to define itself over the centuries. Okay, so to really get to the bottom of this, we have to start with the man himself, Jesus of Nazareth. And to do this right, the very first thing we need to do is try to separate the hard historical evidence from the religious story. Let's just tackle the biggest question right out of the gate. From a purely historical, non-religious point of view, was Jesus of Nazareth a real person? And the answer, from pretty much all secular and religious historians, is a clear yes. And we know this not just from the Bible, but from other sources too. We've got non-Christian historians, both Roman and Jewish, writing about him and his followers just decades after his death. And we even have archaeological proof, like the Pilate stone, which confirms that key people mentioned in the Gospels, like Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who condemned him, were real figures. Now check this out, because this is what's so powerful about this quote. This isn't from a follower, it's from Tacitus, one of Rome's most respected historians. He's actually being critical of what he calls a fatal superstition, but in doing so he independently backs up the core historical facts. A guy named Christus, the founder of this group, was executed by the procurator Pontius Pilate while Tiberius was emperor. That's a huge historical anchor. So, the history checks out. The man existed. But it was the story about his life and what it all meant, the story told by his followers, that would light the fuse for a new world religion. And that story, the one you find in the Gospels, has this incredible arc. Jesus starts his public ministry, gets his 12 main disciples, the apostles, and starts preaching. Things come to a head in his final week in Jerusalem, with the Last Supper, his arrest, and then his crucifixion by the Romans. But of course, the story doesn't stop there. The belief that absolutely electrified his followers was their claim that 3 days later, he came back from the dead.
So that brings up a huge question, right? After its founder is executed, how does this brand new movement, made up of just a handful of people, even manage to survive, let alone start its incredible expansion?
Well, a massive turning point happens just a couple of decades later, around the year 50 AD. The leaders of the movement get together in Jerusalem for a meeting that basically decided the entire future of the faith and whether it would stay a small Jewish sect or become something else entirely. And at the heart of this meeting was a huge debate. On one side, you had James, Jesus' own brother, who argued that if you wanted to follow Jesus, you had to follow Jewish law first. That included things like circumcision. But on the other side, you had the Apostle Paul, who argued for a totally different path, that faith in Christ was all that mattered and that non-Jews, the Gentiles, should be welcomed in without needing to follow those laws.
And in the end, Paul's side won. And that one decision was the key that unlocked everything. It meant Christianity was no longer just a movement within Judaism. It was now a universal mission, open to anyone, anywhere, in the massive Roman Empire and beyond.
But as this new faith starts to spread, it runs right into a brick wall, Roman authority. This kicks off a long period of really brutal persecution. But what happens next is one of the most unbelievable turnarounds in all of human history.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It's mind-blowing. The faith goes from being blamed for the Great Fire of Rome under Emperor Nero to being officially tolerated, then given freedom of worship with the Edict of Milan, and then finally, in the year 380, it's declared the official state religion of the entire Roman Empire. It went from a criminal sect to the state religion in less than 320 years.
But here's the thing. Becoming the official religion created a whole new kind of problem.
With all these different ideas about Christian belief floating around, disagreements weren't just religious debates anymore. Now they were political problems that could threaten the unity of the whole empire.
So, to get everyone on the same page, Emperor Constantine himself steps in and calls the first big empire-wide council at Nicaea in 325 AD. The goal was simple: unify the faith. And the result was the Nicene Creed, a statement of belief that defined what was orthodox, or correct belief. It specifically shut down other ideas like Arianism, which said Jesus wasn't fully divine. This was really the start of an official, state-approved Christianity.
All right, for our last section, we're going to look at something that might surprise you: how the faith kept defining itself. A lot of the symbols, dates, and traditions we think of as being there from the very beginning were actually decided on centuries after Jesus lived. So it really makes you wonder, right? How much of what we connect with the earliest Christians actually comes from that time? Let's take a look at a few examples.
Think about the cross. Today, it's the symbol of Christianity, no question. But for the first couple of centuries, not so much. Early believers actually preferred other symbols, like a fish or an anchor. This was partly so they could identify each other in secret when they were being persecuted, but also to avoid the shame of crucifixion, which was a punishment for criminals. The cross only really took over as the main symbol in the 3rd century. And the crucifix, the image of Jesus on the cross, didn't get popular until the Middle Ages.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. You can see how pragmatic and adaptive the early church was. Take Christmas on December 25th. That date was set in the 4th century, not because anyone knew his actual birthday, but because it lined up perfectly with the hugely popular Roman pagan festival for the unconquered sun. It was a way to co-opt and replace it. Same goes for the image of Jesus we all recognize. Long hair, beard. That look really only shows up in the 4th century, probably inspired by how gods like Jupiter were shown in Roman art. Heck, even the Bible itself wasn't finalized until 381 AD, when a council finally decided on the official list of books.
So, when you put it all together, what you see is that the history of Christianity isn't some straight line, where a set of ideas was handed down perfectly unchanged. It's a history of constant change, adaptation, argument, and definition, shaped by all the cultural and political forces of the day.
From a tiny Jewish sect to a religion that shaped empires, this whole journey shows this incredible dance between faith and history. And it leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. What does it mean for a faith to be so deeply rooted in ancient history, but at the same time to be constantly reinvented by it?